Welcome, podcast listeners. Today we're going to talk about unlearning triggers. So, a trigger, in my humble opinion, is when we are re experiencing something we don't have a conscious memory of. So, we're feeling all these feelings that are actually rooted in a past experience that we don't consciously recall. So it's like those feelings haunt us because we cannot process that past experience for one reason or another. One common reason we can't process it is because we don't have explicit memory of it, because it is something that happened to us very early in life, usually in the first 2 years before we had language to store and code memories explicitly. The other common reason we don't have language or consciously have awareness of this past experience is because we dissociated from it when it was happening. We felt overwhelmed by emotion, especially anger, and we dissociated. And so we can never process that experience. We're kind of stuck. Our body is kind of stuck in that experience. And whenever we are experiencing something familiar to our original experience, those memories, not the memories, the feelings from that original experience can come flooding back out of nowhere, catching us unaware, and we don't understand. We just know that we are not able to function or we're doing something crazy. So I want to share my own experience with this. This is an absolutely crazy story of a trigger that I had about 12 years ago. So I now see in retrospect that this was just me and my body re-experiencing the hatred that I felt toward my mother my whole life that I wasn't consciously aware of. So about 12 years ago, I was an intern at a counseling center where I felt extremely uncomfortable because I had been publicly humiliated in a group supervision at that counseling center by my supervisor and by two other therapists. As a result, every time I was there, I was in tremendous psychic pain, but unfortunately, I was too stupid to trust my gut and to quit working there. So I continued on. One day I was in a supervision meeting with another group of people who I deemed to be safe people. There was an older female therapist that I will call Joan. And Joan seemed like she was not just a safe person, but a very empathic one. And I wanted to get to know her more. Now, unbeknownst to me at that time, I was unconsciously projecting my own mother desires or needs onto Joan, expecting her to be a nurturing presence as an older, empathic therapist and a female. This particular day, I was looking forward to our group supervision, where I derived hope from hearing other therapists talk about their feelings and about their clients' experiences, making me feel less alone. I was desperate for human connection and warmth and expected to find it in the group and specifically from Joan. Yet that day, instead of our usual group meeting where we shared about our cases and our personal struggles, Joan was scheduled to present a slide presentation on her recent trip to Kenya, where she taught psychological principles there for university students. I distinctly remember Joan's voice as she shared that day and how it sounded so much like my mother's. Suddenly, my head was on fire and I felt profound hatred in my head and my body as I stared at Joan, who was speaking about something so seemingly irrelevant and meaningless in the same soft spoken manner as my mother, while I felt so achingly alone and desperate. In that moment, I was acutely re experiencing something that I had felt throughout my entire life. My whole body became hot and feverish. Other supervisors noticed and asked if I was okay. I responded I wasn't, and I immediately left to drive home. When I finally got home, I went and I took a nap for hours. The next day, I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with cellulitis, which is a very painful skin condition that can cause chills and fever. But here is the crazy part. The sudden onset of that cellulitis happened precisely as my body was re-experiencing what felt like neglect of my mother and my subsequent hatred of Joan, who was the mother figure. In hindsight, there is no doubt that my feelings of embodied hatred created the cellulitis. The hatred I felt that day was the cumulative total of what I had unconsciously felt my entire life for my mother. No wonder it lit up my body like a match. I will never again doubt the power of our triggers to make us sick and to create havoc in our lives. Our triggers often keep us from living in the present in many ways. Now, recently I addressed what I believe to be a trigger with my daughter Edie, who is 21 and who is currently living at home. I've done a lot to repair my relationship with Edie the last few years, but there was this remaining sore spot that kept surfacing where she would react to whenever I was speaking. She would become very impatient with me and she'd be urging me always to get to the point, accusing me of repeating myself. I suspected that her impatience in the present was fueled by something from the past, so I gave it a shot. I validated how hard it must be for her to hear me repeat myself, and I asked her where she felt that frustration in her body. She felt it in her chest. I asked her to focus on that sensation of frustration and let her mind float back to the earliest time she felt that same sensation. Immediately, she recalled a period of time about 10 years ago when we were not in a good place in our relationship and where I would kind of force her as an 11-year-old to listen to me speak all the time. I did this because I, at that time, was in denial of the poorness of our relationship and I wanted to make myself feel better. So it was a very manipulative thing that I would do by forcing her to listen to me speak on a regular basis. So I had adult Edie imagine going to her 11-year-old self, validate her anger at her mom, but then also help her to know that her mom has since changed and no longer speaks manipulatively to make everything seem good when it's not. Edie did this, and I have since noticed that she is much more patient with me when I speak now. Now, for those of us who want to heal our relationship with our parents or a partner who has changed for the better, but we're kind of stuck in the past, this type of integration exercise is necessary to help our body recalibrate and acclimate to the present where our anger is no longer beneficial. At times, we re-experience things in ways that are much more subtle and don't feel like triggers, but do make us behave in ways that don't make sense. I can think of two specific times where I was absolutely certain that I would be abandoned and how at these times it created a paranoia for me. The first time was when I was 18 years old and I had gone on a volunteer trip to Mexico. And at that time, I didn't speak Spanish. And the woman who ran the campground where I was volunteering told me my flight had changed and she needed to negotiate with the airline for me to get a new flight home. And that needed to be done in Spanish. Yet something in me told me that the airline would not allow my new flight to be given to me or changed, that I would never leave and that I would be abandoned in Mexico for the rest of my life. It was irrational, but my body was certain of this. The second time that I recall having this kind of experience was about 13 years ago when I was still in grad school for my counseling program. I had gotten a ride to school from another student who lived nearby. Her name is Nicole. We had two classes back to back, which met in the afternoon and the evening. And the first class we had together, the second class, we each had a different instructor in a different classroom, and they both formally ended at 10 p.m., but both of our instructors let us out usually pretty early. So this particular evening, Nicole's class went late. It not only went up to 10 p.m., but it actually went slightly over. And as I waited for her in that dark parking lot, I panicked and I was absolutely convinced that she had already left and gone home and forgotten all about me, and that I was going to have to spend the night in that parking lot. I found another student to give me a ride home, which of course very much confused and scared Nicole when she finally got out of her class and looked for me later. I felt horrible for scaring her, but at the time I felt like I did not have another option. Now, why do I have a paranoia of being abandoned? Historians use a method of reading ancient letters in order to understand the historical context that is called mirror reading. By nature, a letter leaves out much information about the recipient of the letter and about the context of their relationship. Mirror reading is a way to use what we do know to reflect what is hidden from us. For example, the fact that I am triggered by fear of being abandoned overnight in a parking lot or in a country where I don't speak the language is like the ancient letter that I am holding in front of me. It reflects an experience I don't consciously recall, but I know did happen, where I was likely left in a location that felt very unsafe. Based on what I've heard over the years, my guess is that this happened when my mom punished me as a toddler by locking me in the car. Apparently, when I didn't behave by sitting quietly at a restaurant when my parents went out for dinner, she would put me in the car in the parking lot until I learned to behave. I have no idea how long I was left alone in a parked car as a toddler, but for a little child, a few minutes seems like a lifetime. Here's the good news. Instead of this simply providing insight about my irrational fear of abandonment, I can recalibrate my entire being by integrating with little Bronwyn, helping her see there is no more threat of abandonment. In other words, triggers don't have to last. When we understand the context, we have the power to undo them altogether. That is the gift of our imagination. So here is an example of what I did for myself recently of this integration exercise. Please, listeners, use this as a template for yourself. I close my eyes and I picture little Bronwyn as a toddler when her mom is threatening to lock her in the car. I imagine the look of fear on her face, and I imagine my adult self going to her, looking her in the eyes while mom fades into the background. I say, I see you, little Bronwyn, and I don't blame you for being terrified. Our mom has no clue what is developmentally appropriate for a toddler, that you can't just sit still at a restaurant for a couple hours as if you were an adult. All the shame that you feel about disappointing her isn't yours, but hers. So let's put it all in this big cardboard box and give it back to her. Return to owner. When she locks you in the car, it is abominable because you're in a strange place all alone and you are afraid that it will never end. But I need you to know that you are safe now. because I am here and I am rescuing you. I am safe and I know better than to put you in a car by yourself or expect you to do things that you are not yet able to do. I want to apologize for allowing you to feel so alone and so helpless for so long because I didn't rescue you sooner. I am sorry. Please forgive me for being blind. I had no idea how much you needed me all that time or how powerful I am for you. But I am here now and I am committed to never leaving you again and winning back your trust in me. Now that we have each other, we're safe and we're strong and we will never be helpless or alone ever again. And now we're free to feel our anger at our mother who tormented us by locking us in the car. We will channel our anger out of our body in a productive way to protect us from bullies like her and by giving us a voice. And that, dear listener, is how you subdue a trigger, because triggers present beautiful opportunities to integrate. Just like the skin from a scar is immensely stronger than the original skin, our integrated self is more whole than if we'd never been broken in the first place. Some of you might be familiar with kintsugi pottery. It's called kintsugi, and it is a Japanese art that creates intentional fractures within pottery in order to hew the pieces back together with gold. The finished product is considerably more beautiful and more valuable. To me, kintsugi is a visible depiction of how beautiful humans are when we become whole, while also remembering the brokenness that led us on the journey in the first place. Now, I would love to hear from some of you guys who have triggers and who have integration stories. I would love to hear on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, your own stories of your own triggers as well as integration and how it's working for you. So please share. Also, please do this exercise for yourself with a trigger that you are becoming more aware of. And please share this with a friend. Thanks for listening.